it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen.
Now then, some stories aren't meant to be heard, only endured. When a struggling musician is drawn into the underground world of extreme metal, it feels like opportunity, raw, unfiltered, and intoxicating. But beneath the music lies something older, something ritualistic. The deeper he goes, the more the scene begins to change. It's less about sound and more about devotion. And the people behind it aren't just fans, they're followers, part of something vast, hidden, and terrifyingly real.
A Cult of Metal by Kyle Meadows. When I was younger, I remember my grandfather telling me not to be afraid of my dad. He was an old, wrinkled man with pale skin, blue eyes, and a crinkled-up face, and, most striking to me, hair as black as coal. The only traits he shared at all with father were his eyes, and a shred of his temper. That was admittedly grandfather's own fault. In his youth, while raising my dad, he was a vicious drunk. He was extremely brutal in his tirades. I don't wish to say he changed very much as an old man, simply drunk less. The absence of alcohol made him no saint, but the presence of age made him see what he'd created. I honestly wonder if grandfather pitied me while I crept around the halls of father's home. Did his thoughts turn to me at night when I'd move silently to secure food and water? Well, it wasn't always like that. I remember a time when I wasn't hungry and emaciated, but that particular period of my childhood is not something I can remember well. But perhaps that was mercy for me. I honestly prefer not to remember all of it, but I still remember some. I remember being hungry. I remember measuring every single footstep, listening to every single breath. I remember my anxiety as water from the faucet whooshed into my cup, and the relief when nobody came running down the stairs. Well, I was an intelligent child, though not physically intimidating, and coupled with my disposition towards anxiety, I willingly delved headfirst into a situation that I failed to realize would be so stressful. I was young. I wanted father to love me, so I endured many things. I wondered if maybe father had felt the same way about his own monster. His dad used to beat not only him, and not only his siblings, and not only his mother, but potentially anybody that pissed him off when he was drunk. Grandfather was by no means a good man. He was a brutal man from the mountains of Appalachia, a far cry from the rest of us. It was incredible that people would excuse his behavior in that era. While his primary victim, my grandmother, was his biggest defender. For some reason it amazes me that his children then were not. Perhaps the most damning thing my grandfather ever did was brutally assault my grandmother with my uncle present. My uncle was a child from a previous marriage. His father had committed suicide without a word. Maybe that's why my grandmother defended her husband so much. She didn't want to lose him either. But as he watched my grandfather beat my grandmother that night, I can only imagine a boy who wasn't able to raise his hand in critical moments before surged with fury. And then he grabbed a knife and stabbed my grandfather 17 times. Well, this occurrence changed him. He started to behave as if he'd been possessed of some boundless kindness. And this was the grandfather I knew, and he used to tell me strange stories. He always told me to be vigilant for the signs of a particular family madness, a madness he swore he had not outgrown. Well, it did not exist in father, he claimed, but the madness existed within me. I couldn't have realized what he meant then. Well, my father seemed pretty crazy at some points, but grandfather had told me about what my uncle had done and what he'd seen as a result. It was some years later that grandfather was stricken with illness and certain to die. He had private words with his children and then called us in alone as well. There were 4 of us, My sister, myself, and my 2 cousins. Grandfather was weeping after seeing his children. No doubt many apologies were handed out to them. My uncle was not among them. He died many years earlier, in a fashion similar to his own father, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. I imagine that he glossed over that when speaking to his still living children. But grandfather offered a different kind of apology to us. He told us about when he was dying in the hospital. "Oh, I was a bad man," he claimed to us. "A hateful man. I wasn't able to cope with the world around me. But you children need to understand, because all of you carry a dreadful gift. Something that my father and mother saw fit to escape from before they themselves were driven mad. Oh, I drank so much, and I hurt your parents, kids. Yeah, I hurt them really bad. I know that some of them have hurt you too. I want you to know, I'm sorry, and I want to warn you." Well, we leaned into grandfather's story, exchanging uncertain glances with one another. "One day, you children will wake up, and you'll smell rot. It won't be like the typical kind of decay. It'll be a scent in your nose like a penny in your mouth. You might hear things like wails so loud they seem at first to be sirens. Well, they'll come and go, but they are symptoms. When you start to hear those things, you have to fight harder. You have to stay vigilant, or the sickness will consume you. It isn't your fault that it'll happen. Sometimes things happen for no reason. But if you're not vigilant, the scent and sound will drive you to seek violence on those you love." Grandfather began to tear up. We did too, as gripped by fear as we were. When your uncle stabbed me all those years ago, something happened to the madness. I died on the table, kids. Oh, I died twice, and they brought me back both times. His voice trailed into silence as he contemplated his own sentence. If he hadn't done that, I couldn't have pulled myself together. If I hadn't died, I'd still be afflicted. When I died the second time, I remember floating above my body, looking down on the operating room. And beside me, between the doctors, I saw something emerge from the earth children, a black beast with bright orange eyes. Its movements were jerky, like in those old claymation specials. It jerked its arm right over to where I was floating. It told me that I belonged to it. Well, my grandfather's story naturally scared the hell out of us. Even though my cousins told their mom, nobody would confront their sick father about it. And he died later that night. I often heard weird things about grandfather's death. Things that sounded an awful lot like his death was far from ordinary. I know they said the levels of iron in his blood and organs were extremely high, higher than even those with hemochromatosis normally had. Yet he developed no apparent life-threatening conditions. It seemed as though the iron may have prolonged his life. Grandfather had been cutting the veins on his arms, we discovered, likely in an attempt to kill himself. And his thick blood was slow to bleed, so it was at least a little possible that he survived varied attempts of the same nature. The various revelations had their toll on my father. For a brief while he was some form of lucid, if not stricken by some inexplicable lamentations. I don't know what father was told by grandfather, but at least for a little bit it changed him. Father broke down to me in the aftermath and confessed his sins, as he put it. My father was a religious man once. He tried to be a church deacon, but after his brother died, he cast off faith. He tried to find his way in the world as a carpenter, as a man of God, and finally as a soldier on the battlefield. But the horrors of Desert Storm were contained to some of the missions that the Army Rangers ran. My father himself told me of one of the encounters he had with the enemy. They came over the hill, Father sobbed at me. He started to describe a situation in which he and others were essentially forced to shoot children for survival. I didn't have a choice if I wanted to live. We tried to talk him down. We tried to scare him before we tried to shoot him. We didn't get a choice in the end, boy. It was us or them. They didn't even make a noise when they fell over. They just crumpled like bottles under our boots. Soon after, though, my father started to experience even more brutal mood swings than before. He would hop from calm to violent in an instant. He would attack me for the slightest noise. Well, my sister was lucky to live with our mother. In truth, I wanted to live with her too. Well, I could have. At any moment, I only had to call her and end the abuse. But, well, in his most lucid moments, Father had begged me. "Please," he pleaded, "don't give up on me." It wasn't a fair request, and I was a child too. I was the latest victim to crumple under his boot. And for the next few years, he grew worse. I stopped going to school. We stopped eating regularly. He didn't pay bills on time, leading to several shut-offs. Basic necessities were scarce, and so too was mercy. He became restless in those final days. For even the slightest mistake or the smallest noise, there'd be a beating. I endured it. I endured all of it. I wanted to endure it. Well, that is until the final night with my father. I'd been creeping to get some water, but as soon as I opened the door, I could faintly see his shape sitting in the darkness. I could smell copper in the air as he stood up. "Think I don't know about your nighttime drink runs? Oh, that's a beating, boy." He had for some reason been waiting in the room that was positioned between mine and the kitchen. The shadows played off his nearly emotionless face. There was no malice in what he was doing. This was how he disciplined his child now. This is what he needed to do. In my father's broken mind, it must have been proper. I slammed my door shut and shunted my dresser against it. I recognized the killing intent in his eyes immediately. I'd seen it before the last few times, in the worst of the beatings that left my hands shaking and my body broken. This was the night. I was gonna die that night, and I knew it. My first and last act of rebellion would be to call the police. I sat on the phone with the operator for half an hour while Father bashed at my door. He kept calling out my name and making cruel jeers at me. "Open the goddamn door, boy. My hands are bleeding. Do you want me to get an axe? I'll bash this fucking door down if I have to." In the distance, there were sirens, but they weren't close enough to reach me before he did. I saw the glint of metal as my door and dresser began to shatter. He'd found his hatchet and was carving through the door. As it grew weaker, he kicked and shoved at it, hacking away while I trembled on my dirty bed in the corner. The sirens grew louder. They were close by now. Still, my father kicked his way. But finally, he was fully into my room, and they couldn't have felt any further away. He threw his hatchet at my window, shattering it as he advanced on me. "No axe for you, boy. Discipline shouldn't come from tools." He shoved me against my room wall, lifting me off my bed. One hand gripped my neck, and then the other, as he started to dig his thumbs into my throat and squeeze. Oh, he shook me, beating my head against the wall behind, while my hands fruitlessly pried at his. "You're just like me, boy. We gotta fix that. We have to fix your weakness. We have to eliminate it at the source." Oh, I tried to yell, to argue, to struggle, but I wasn't equipped to fight my father. Of all people, I was the least prepared. I had no killing intent. I was frustrated at my mistreatment, but I didn't have it in me to be angry. Even now, as it seemed I would die, I couldn't hate the man before me. I simply felt utterly, completely betrayed as I was sent off into the darkness. The sound of the sirens so loud now that I felt them drop upon me, even as I lost all sensation. I was lucky. They shot my father through the window, a bullet catching him in the head. I was unconscious, but I was alive. I woke up in an ambulance, groggy and scared. It took both of the paramedics to hold me when I started to struggle. I had a nervous breakdown of some kind, coupled with post-traumatic stress and anxiety disorder, and a newly acquired personality disorder. I had a difficult period with therapy, hospitals, and failed suicide attempts. It took a while to pull myself together. There were some days I didn't want to. Oh, there were bad weeks, bad years even. I'd been sent back to my mother for recovery. She was furious. Well, not with me, but with my father, with the situation. She had a difficult time understanding why I'd stayed, and that might have been the biggest source of friction between us for a while. I don't know why she ever understood. All I know is that after some time she seemed to drop it. Well, I had to. It was part of moving on. I moved out some months after I turned 19, still far from well, but forcing myself to try and function. I had a lot of nervous breakdowns in those days. Even part-time jobs proved stressful and taxing. Angry customers, inexperienced managers, or plainly hard days played badly with my frayed nerves. Trying to get better from this led to odd personality quirks, weird habits, atypical beliefs, and passive qualities. Stress played havoc with my rational thinking. Submission to my friends and family was an easy way to avoid it. I lived a life where I was considerably less for a time. And then one day, I was able to do a little more. Each day past then, my abilities seemed to rebound. I suppose that whereas trauma had prevailed for some time, finally there was more of me than there was of it. I think I simply outgrew it. I found myself with a steady part-time job at a pizza place. I had a cheap house I was renting with friends that travelled, and I had gotten healthier. I never forgot, though. As much progress as I made, I guess some things just wound up staying with me. I prowled the strange corners of the internet, reading about obscure religions and occult conspiracies fairly often. I was agnostic on a good day, but a nihilistic atheist all the others. I'd partially blame religion for my abuse from him. I became preoccupied with mythology in my attempt to find an actual answer, but saw them as the stories I needed them to be. Old gods, greater deities, and more inhabited my faux reality, and yet a supposed new religion had begun to spread that nobody had yet known the name for. The first rumors came from the hikers in Appalachia, posting on a forum I frequented that they'd stumbled on some kind of village cult. Didn't have any pictures, which was my first red flag. They claimed the place made their phones and cameras lock up. But they said that the locals seemed friendly, even though their physical appearances may betray that truth. Sewing and sticking shards of metal into various places on their skin. They didn't speak much of their religion, nor would they try to evangelize to their guests. They spoke briefly of metal's gospel, so the hikers called them the cult of metal. But what exactly is the gospel? Well, the hikers had no answer. Looking through their blogs, I could see that they were indeed the real deal, with tons of photos of different trails and scenery that they'd encountered. It was just odd that for this particular claim, all of their equipment stopped working at once. And naturally, not a lot of people believed them, and at first the story didn't circulate. Friendly religious cults aren't great for horror stories. Well, the story gained a tiny bit of traction for a short time when somebody joined the forum, claiming to have been contacted by the group about the gospel of metal, and asked if anybody on our forum knew what it was. It was received largely as a prank, though people responded to it by and large in an honest fashion. Only occasionally did somebody pull some weird, elitist shit like demanding one read through an entire active forum for similar topics. Often, though, they were ignored. Still, that was how I first heard about the cult of metal. For a bit, we got cult of metal-related topics, people posting real gospel of metal stuff, and so on. It died down a few months in, and I'd nearly forgotten about it until a very short time ago. The air in the town had smelled different that morning. The scent of mash from the distillery usually prevailed in the air every morning, but On this day, the mash smelled as if it were mixed with rotten meat. I thought that it vaguely smelled of copper, recalling my grandfather's words and father's wrath. I was able to dismiss the fairy tale easily enough, though. I thought it was a more tangible issue. Maybe something had happened with the distillery. Well, no sirens or alarms, so it couldn't be serious. I checked my phone, but there were no emergency notices. The worst thing about today was the odd smell and the fact that my phone took too long to load up Messenger on the walk to work. I mentioned the smell to my co-workers for small talk, but none of them seemed to know what I meant. The air smelled the same as it always did for them. But even inside the restaurant, I could faintly smell the copper. It only bothered me as much as an unwanted yet barely noticeable smell might, but I still took notice of it. It was definitely powerful outside of the building, though. I held my arm to face when taking out the trash, trying to believe the smell was just the trash. I was having a very hard time dismissing it anymore. When I returned inside, the smell had become tolerable once again. A customer sat in one of the window tables that looked out into the street, but his eyes were turned towards me from the moment I walked in the door. He gazed at me eagerly, the visible part of his face contorted into some kind of smile underneath his mess of coal-black hair. Despite being the morning, this was still summer, so I found the apparently thick jacket he wore to be a little too thick to be comfortable. In particular, he wasn't shy about brandishing a mask that covered a little less than half of his face while he grinned in my direction. I tossed my head back to check for a kitchen ticket to see that there were none. He hadn't ordered anything yet, so I threw an aside to my other co-worker at the counter to ask if she recognized him. She looked up at him briefly, returning her eyes to the pizza boxes that needed to be folded. She shrugged, saying that she didn't think she'd seen him before, but couldn't be sure. Her eyes trailed back up to his face, and she saw him still drilling me with his gaze. Well, I'd retreated around the corner into the kitchen now. She poked her face through the ticket window, teasing me about my newfound admirer. But the truth was, the way he looked at me from the shadow of his hood made my flesh wriggle in discomfort. He sat there for an entire hour before my co-worker finally shared my level of concern. And without her constantly assuring me it was fine, I became empowered to bring the issue before my boss. Wouldn't you know it? The minute we left from the back of the kitchen, the man had gotten up and glided out of the door. Well, the boss pulled cameras. We'd all three agreed that this behavior was some level of disturbing. The recorded footage added some depth to that for me. From before the gentleman even opened the glass door to the moment he left, the footage had strange visual distortions. The colors were off, the image was slightly pixelated, and the ratio was warped vertically. Even so, the man's face may have been obscured through the failings of technology and his hood, but his expression was unmistakable. The alarming thing was how he held fast to that expression for apparently the entire hour. We didn't involve the police. Honestly, with regards to our small-town cops and this damaged footage, it was fairly obvious they didn't have the ability to simply restore it as a better-equipped facility might. My boss opted to hold on to the footage. If the man came in again, we'd have a better reason to try and pay somebody for restoration and use it against the man in court. My co-worker got my boss to cover the register while she drove me home. We made arrangements for a ride the next day. Well, by this time, I should mention, the smell was at least gone. Still, my encounter that day was one which encouraged me to take caution. While it always locked my house when I wasn't home, I seldom had the front door or living room windows locked when I was actually present. Well, that evening, I didn't take the chance. Even without windows in the hall by my door, I turned off the hall light, lest even the peephole give away my concealed presence. My lights were even off where they were near windows. A blackout curtain long put to pasture saw revival when I hung it against my bedroom window. I woke up when I heard something thump on my porch, followed by the creak of the old wood which composed it. All the liquids in my body evaporated, and I pulled the covers with me as I shrank towards the head of my bed. I shook myself to full wakefulness fairly quickly as my adrenaline dispersed. I silently began to peel the covers back when a knock came at the door. In the darkness of my room, all there was for light were the crimson letters on the alarm clock, casting a dim, ominous glow over my bed and walls. When just past 1 in the morning, somebody was rapping at my door. The numbers on my alarm clock began to flicker. I stealthily moved from my room and turned into the hall, creeping up to my own door to get a glimpse at whatever was on the other side. I pressed my eye to the looking glass and saw the man from the restaurant upon my porch. Now I saw him from the front, but without a light outside, I would not have been able to understand. 2 of my questions were suddenly answered. His face had been hidden due to the fact that half of it was a gruesome patchwork of jagged metal pieces jammed deeply into his skin. Some were even held in place with stitches, and the pieces that weren't jammed into the skin were fastened with what could only be described as screws. He didn't have a cheek on that side, and I could see his gums with metal jammed into his teeth and jaw that seemed to simply bleed into the rest of the metal. My second question was how he found out I was home. I didn't need to ask how he found out where I lived. I simply surmised that I had been followed. But I had exposed myself. I had left one light on that I'd failed to notice from my room. My porch light, hidden from my scrutiny, still bloomed in the darkness. The moment I caught sight of him, my heart dropped. My chest grew tight and my breath shallow. He loitered on the porch a moment longer, before putting his own eye to the peephole. I told myself he couldn't see me. I've looked into this peephole before, just like this, to test the very thesis. There was no way. But even so, he started speaking as if he knew I were listening. "I know your family." The thing's voice crunched against my door. "I know you smelled it. The putrid scent of rotten metal in the air. Oh, it's a symptom, you know. It's something that's always there, but usually just goes unnoticed. And then you get sick. But you weren't there when it happened. Oh no, you came from after." A pause in the voice as fingers drummed against my door. "Oh, partner, I was just thinking I should introduce myself. I've surrendered my name unto the Lord, child. You may simply call me his deacon." I did not reply to the thing's invitations. I acted as though I weren't there, but still I was affixed to what the thing spouted by simple anxiety. "I've been sent by his prophet on a special task. This task has led me to you. You are sick and need glorious salvation. It is a sickness not of the mind, but the spirit. Not of the visceral, but of something even more vulnerable. You did nothing to become sick. You inherited the sickness. But your particular sickness is a mark of sin. Fret not. I welcome you with arms splayed wide. I come bearing an invitation to the place you truly belong." Another pause, as it drummed against the door slightly more vigorously. My hand started to fish at my pajamas, but I'd been ill-prepared. My phone was still in my room, and I was not willing to move. I don't know why, but I couldn't muster up the will to move. But there's no rush. No fuss, no worries. I'll find you soon, and you will hear his prophet's gospel. Then surely you will be given to him. Oh, child of my child's child, ready yourself for your first service. We'll see if God will forgive you." I could almost feel the pressure of his body shift from where I stood as our porch groaned. He didn't look so heavy at work, but perhaps there was even more metal beneath his thick clothing. Perhaps he wore that jacket to conceal any jagged corners. And yet when he moved, it was as smooth as could be. He seemed to skate through the air as he left my yard and turned onto the street. I swore his feet weren't even moving. Free now from my formerly imminent concern, I dashed to my room and grabbed at my phone. I called the police. I filed a report on the important details, his physical description, what he was wearing, and made them take note of my earlier incident. They were going to contact Boss for the video later. I was going to tell him when I went in. It was almost 3 a.m. by the time we were finished, and after the cops left, I couldn't go back to sleep. I stayed awake until my shift, and tired or not, I worked. I informed my boss of what had happened, and he had the footage ready in case he was contacted. Still, the fact he intended to come back was at least taken seriously by the police. For the next 2 weeks, there was an officer on my street at night. Provided it wasn't a great street, so I might not have been the only reason, but still I was reassured. For the entirety of the 2 weeks, the man didn't show up at my door. But as soon as the cop left, that changed. He was back that night. I kept my curtains up and had been remembering to turn my porch light off. When he arrived back this night, I'm not sure how he knew I was home. As the scent passed, and just because your symptoms have subsided does not mean this disease is gone. Even the sickness sleeps. You can go days or weeks without feeling it, without the smell of copper, without the madness it brings. But you shouldn't fear the madness, for it's not truly insanity. It's truth turning about within your skull. And as you grasp the despair, your understanding only widens. While he spoke from behind my window, I was desperately trying to get my phone to work. The screen was frozen, the bright light certainly cutting through the thick curtains, even if just a bit. In a fit of panic, I started to reboot it, turning it off and begging for it to load while I sat frozen in my bedroom. I could hear that mangled half of his face scraping and clinking against the glass as he spoke. It was our people who found the hobbit's grave resting within the mountain's breast. Our 2 maidens found the vaulted tomb and opened it, touching something gloriously forbidden. They disturbed the dissident king's daughter of bones, and so our Lord stole back her cradle to the sea of stars. Yet he left with the maidens a gift of hope, a song that was ingrained in their souls. Within the cradle of mountains were new laws made, and they together brought back our Lord's grace and sickness. My phone had yet to reboot. I was staring at the screen, pleading with the goddamn circle of dots to boot the thing so I could call the cops. The circle was a barely calming reminder of the urgency. Outside my window, he continued. Not all accepted his gift at first. Even though the sickness spread, the youngest babies were spared. Your grandfather's father's ilk may have knowingly sinned, but the metal forgives. If you've smelt the rot of the world, the scent of copper, then it is time. Lend me your ears, brothers and sisters of the mountains. Lend me your ear, boy. Can you find it inside your heart to atone? I said, boy, can you find it inside your heart to atone? Do you seek forgiveness? Do you seek salvation? Do you seek answers? Those pigs will never offer you communion. I can feel your fingers prodding against that glass from here. The metal has decreed that you will hear me before you can call for help. I stopped breathing, looking at the screen on my phone as the circle continued to try to load. What did he just say? My head turned towards the window as I processed. Did he just reference my phone? So he could see it from outside. He must have. But how could he have known about any issues on my phone? As surely as metal rusts with lack of care, with lack of faith, your soul will rot. Our first service will conclude soon, but if you want a second, head to the mountains on a night of fog and cloudy sky. We have catalogued your scent, sinner. You need only call for us when the conditions are right, and we will take you home for your second service. With the truth of his prophet beating in your breast, you'll be ready for your communion. I held my breath as his child words filtered through my curtain, flooding my room with fear. I pounded at the phone screen flaccidly as my own convictions faded, and with some final words I felt the stranger depart from my window. Heed the metal, child. The sickness spreads. Every inch of metal in this town will succumb to the rot from eons discarded. My phone screen finally binged to life under my thumbs moments later, but my resolve was drained. I still called the police, but they didn't find him this time either. I don't think they believed me quite as much as I wanted them to, and they didn't leave a squad car this time. But it turned out that, thankfully, I didn't need one for the next few weeks. Life returned to normal. That was until I woke up one morning to the sound of sirens, and once again smelled acrid copper. There were too many sirens for a town as small as mine. Well, that's what I thought as I stumbled out of my room and crashed into my front door. I gathered myself and opened it. But as I did, the sirens stopped. Outside, I only saw darkness and heard crickets. Well, I listened for minutes, but heard no signs of sirens. I was gripped with a firm confusion. Was it because I was tired? Perhaps I'd misheard my alarm for something far, far louder. But was it really that simple? I pulled myself into the kitchen to see the time plastered on the oven. It wasn't even 6 in the morning, yet though the sirens had faded to nothing, the acrid smell remained strong. I honestly had forgotten about my grandfather's ramblings of the sirens, but the sound, coupled with the smell, forced me to recall. It was an odd day at work. I went in a few minutes early, as I always did. In the middle of our lunch rush, the cash register jammed and became entirely defunct. We had to stop everything to pull the spare and make a hasty withdrawal at the bank. But by the time we got back from there, more things had started to break down. On the way, it started with bikes. Other businesses' registers were doing the same thing. It wasn't all at once, but everything seemed to be breaking. Or more specifically, the metal components in everything seemed to be the only parts of them breaking. Electronics were stalling, phones weren't working, computers were freezing. Even old computerless cars began to break down as their pistons broke inside of their shafts. If only to exacerbate the situation, metals of buildings began to give out. In minutes our city had completely collapsed. The few large buildings we had broke suddenly, killing all of those inside and surely the majority of those that stood around them, trying desperately to get their phones to work. Those that survived beneath the rubble must have suffocated. People with metal fillings in their teeth had them slosh out of their place, metal teeth casings peeled away like corn skin. Bolts in ankles and screws in hips gave out. Those with pacemakers never even made it this far, dying with the initial loss of electronics. A great many of us survived, but our ruined town was mostly rubble now. The smell dissipated, and at that time everybody's phones began to work once again. Anybody in a conversation with somebody out of town had their messages finally delivered, and it was all they could do to call for help. The police of our town were as afraid and confused as the rest of us were. The more religious people were at their wits' end, swearing that this was the apocalypse. The National Guard came to our small mountain town pretty quickly. They set up camps, tents for the families to use. I got my own tent, thankfully. They found power lines out of the area and spent a few days getting them rewired out to the areas of the town where the people were. The food wasn't scarce, but it wasn't plentiful either. It was rationed with great caution, as if it was some sort of famine. I asked, but according to the guard, this wasn't happening anywhere else but here. The FBI came. They interviewed us one by one, asked us if there was anything strange. I told them about his deacon, and that I'd filed 2 police reports on him, as well as there being some evidence from a camera. I informed them of his rants about metal and the rot, and suggested there was some kind of connection. They offered me a number to contact them with, but I don't know how serious they were. Very soon after the guard showed up, my phone as well as the phones of others had completely fallen apart. Well, I think they knew that. I think the phone number they gave me didn't matter. I never got to test it out. We didn't really control our movements, aside from putting a curfew and roll call into place. The roll call wasn't even comprehensive or intrusive. Somebody just went round after curfew to check our tents and make sure we were there. And somebody came by in the morning to make sure we were still there. I was never really sure why they did that, but I just assumed it was for safety purposes. There were other questions on my mind. We'd hardly been in this situation for a week when a few friends and myself decided to make the most of it. Well, the best we could, and head to a hiking trail nearby. They'd done well to provide us with books and the like, but we were bored nonetheless. I like reading books, but I used to do more than just that. I played games, watched movies, read news. But I also liked to hike a lot. With a straight week of reading logged under my belt, a good and proper hike would help me digest those narratives. We very quickly encountered a problem, though. A lot of that hiking trail was bridged, primarily because it was dangerous on the alternative routes. Only better-equipped hikers go on those, and with the metal rot that occurred, not a whole lot of people had the gear in hand. My friends were determined, though, and insisted we take the treacherous path. I protested, but ultimately succumbed to peer pressure. I went on the dangerous route with them, feeling a mix of my measured confidence and a want to not be left behind. We travelled on thin trails, clung to the side of a mountain, and edged along a tiny platform of stone that protruded just far enough for us to tiptoe on. We navigated through dense brush to find ways around the down bridges, and pressed maybe an hour into the trail when we decided to turn back. The hike itself wasn't the issue, but the farther we went, the more disquieted we felt about not having any way to call for help. We had packed a flare, but without magnesium it wasn't much of a signal. Discussing that was actually what led to us calling it off. Then, to make matters worse, something was clearly wrong with my friends. I hadn't thought much about it in the beginning, but as they became more winded and tired, I was nearly provoked to broach them about it. Instead, I half-heartedly cast an aside about how out of shape they must all have been. Well, they dismissed me jokingly, called me a freak of nature for not being tired, and we laughed it off. But we didn't do much more laughing after that. Things got pretty twisted on our way back. I began to smell that acrid copper again, and winced at the first sniff of it, fearing that some other horrible malady would befall all of us. Instead, the person at the front of the group simply stopped in place, fidgeted for a moment, and then went completely still. We tried all sorts of things to get him to move, and eventually settled on needing to drag him out. The problem was, though, that we weren't going to be able to carry him across the same precarious ledge we'd travelled to get here. Refusing to leave him behind, but unable to go back the way we came, we spent a while sussing out a way to get back on a potentially safer, if much longer, path. There were trails up and over the mountain that spun themselves back to near where we entered, so we simply needed to head a little deeper to find one. To make that faster, the other two decided that they'd go on ahead so they could move quick but try to keep each other in line of sight. I stayed back with my immobile companion for much the same reason. If they found a trail, they'd be back. No more than an hour, they said. By the time I could tell it was evening, I was through chastising myself for having a poor sense of time and being utterly impatient. I was right, though. They were taking far too long. Something must have happened to them. I wondered if they too had been rendered immobile like my friend. If I left, would the same thing happen to me? I couldn't just sit there while my friends might have been in trouble. But I couldn't just leave my other friend here either. Nor did I want to be stuck here after dark if I could help it. I dragged his sometimes limp, sometimes rigid form through the trail that they'd set down, hoping I'd find a sign sooner than my body found itself exhausted. I hadn't walked for 10 minutes when I came upon them. One was frozen in much the same manner that our first friend had been before we were moving him. Wrapped around his wrist was my other friend's hand, who was facing the opposite direction for whatever reason. I gathered that one of them froze, the other had tried to get them to move, and then they froze as well. I dropped the person I was carrying and hit the ground in utter defeat. I couldn't drag all of them out. I could find a trail, but could I find a trail, traffic to the end of the mountain, and be back to drag each of them out before nightfall? No way. There wasn't even a guarantee that I'd picked the right trail, or a safe one. We hadn't brought tents, sleeping bags, or hammocks. We just brought backpacks with basic necessities for a hike. So I found myself essentially alone, decidedly ill-prepared, and for all intents and purposes immobile, even if it was due to moral and ethical concerns. Basically, I was completely and properly fucked. Or maybe somebody else. If it had been somebody else, they could have made an actual choice. I was already undergoing small relapses due to what happened to the town, but with my friends like living statues and my inability to help them properly, I felt my anxiety start to rise. I couldn't think straight. I wasn't in the position to make a healthy choice. I moved them over to a particularly big tree and laid them against it, before sitting myself down near them and building a fire. The night came slowly. I was counting the sounds in the distance. They would see that we'd missed roll call. Somebody had come looking for us, and they basically had to. If they weren't keeping roll to track us, then why else? Yet I heard nothing in the distance, even as the sun descended behind the mountain. In the night, over the din of insects, I decided that they needed to be close to the fire. That's when I realized how cold they were to the touch, when I realized their lips were blue, and when I felt that they no longer had pulses. I mourned alone in the forest as the fog settled in during the night. A terrible rage bubbled in my guts, and I hit the ground once as hard as I could muster, a dull thud and a tiny hole in the dirt being the only thing I had to show for it. I hit the ground again, but with far less conviction. My hand limply struck the earth in a vain act of defiance against the arbitrary cruelty we'd been subjected to. My thoughts spun out of control. Were they aware the entire time, but unable to move? Were they brain dead the moment they stopped moving? Did they see me do nothing but move them and make a fire, resigning them to their fates? Did they hate me when they died? I started to bawl. I began to bash my head into the dirt while I sobbed and heaved out wails and cries. I wrapped myself in my arms as I chewed lightly at my own mouth when I wasn't gritting my teeth or crying out. It was in that unrelenting darkness that closed in on my body and mind that I heard a voice ring out to me. A familiar voice. They came for us after all. It was too late for my friends, but they still came. They tried. I held the hope for only a moment before realizing where I'd heard this voice before. "My dear sinner," it hissed slyly. His deacon strode up to me as brush crunched beneath his heel. His coat was adorned with decorations of metal applied with a very nearly purposeful sense of chaos. His attire clinked like wind chimes in the night. His deacon's presence seemed to silence the insects. The sickness has reached its final stage, but it won't spread beyond this town. Not until you sing your gospel, not until you sing your truth. All diseases need a method of transmission. For your strain, you must spread the gospel. Speak the truth, and the sickness spreads. I think in that moment I realized that he might have been at fault. I believed that he was. I was off of the ground, all of my indecision gone as I spiraled into a blood-curdling rage. I sprinted into him. As I shoved him to the ground and leapt on top of him, I began to beat him in his stupid fucking face and tear at his damn shitty coat. My hands shredded themselves on the metal that I hit, but I ignored the pain and gritted my teeth so hard I thought they might break. As I lost control, the thought of breaking my teeth made me slow down. It was just enough for his hand to shoot out from under his coat, covered in sharp bits of metal, and jam me in the eye. I reared back and howled. With the same hand, he slashed me across the face. I felt my face go to pieces as I stumbled back and hit the ground, clutching loose skin as I groaned. I felt the man's cold metal fingers sock me right in the nose, and I started to grow nauseous from the pain right after the sick crack. I rolled around, dazed and unable to stand as the man chortled above me. Boy, there's a fire in you. There's a fire in all of you, all those who are like you. He grabbed me by the hands that I used to hold my face and started to pry them away. The darkness I'd made for myself to writhe in parted as he drew my hands apart like curtains. I saw his mangled face and wicked eyes glinting in the moonlight as the flames lapped at his back. He pressed forward and folded me onto the ground, my legs strained as they slid out at discomforting angles beneath me. My feet were practically at my ribcage, splayed out to the sides. He had my wrists. I had no leverage, no grip, and I had no balance. I was lightheaded and weak. I had absolutely no chance. He threw my hands aside, and with another jab to my skull, the world ceased. I woke up a few minutes after the impact, trussed up and unable to move, possibly even more uncomfortable than when I was pinned down. The man was dragging me on something like a wagon or trolley that he trailed behind him. I tried to move, but the pain in my nose came back to me almost as quickly as I'd come back to the conscious world. Slight movements churned my stomach. I hadn't felt it at the time, but my knees must have been strained horrifically. I wasn't able to move my legs well. I dread to think about how I could walk. The eye that he stabbed with his fingers, as well as the shredded part of my face, had been wrapped with a tattered bandage. It was tightly affixed to my face, leaving my jaw unable to move. We bumped along the deepest forest trail as my mind raced with terrified thoughts. My single working eye examined the sky and trees above me, catching the faintest glimpses of stars and the moon through the fog and forest canopy. My captor was mumbling to himself. I didn't catch much over the sound of the axles thumping and thudding beneath me as this man managed to pull me through rough terrain. What I did catch was a confusing assortment of incomplete thoughts. Woe to the bride of sorrows, cast out, mercy for the grieving, metal sewed to sinew and us, Lord, for we have trespassed. He seemed to be praying. I didn't speak, trying to think my way out of a confusing situation. Whatever predicament I was in, there was no way I was walking out of it. With my hands bound, dragging myself didn't seem so plausible either. I laid in that damn wagon for what could have been hours before it stopped. I heard his deacon walk around the side of the wagon and watch the gate at my feet open. This time his hand that wasn't coated in metal reached out and dragged me by the foot towards the front of the wagon, the pain making me squirm. He sat me up on the gate, and before me I saw Frankfurt yet again. Everyone, the National Guardsmen, the people, they were all stuck like my friends were. What tragedy has befallen them? Do you know? Metal's rot has claimed them, just as it has claimed your springs and screws. I wanted to cry, or scream, or do something. I could feel anger and sadness within me, trying to boil to the surface, but all I could do was muster a strange, disconnected feeling. I barely felt like I was in my own body at the sight of all theirs. I barely felt like breathing. I don't really know why. I suppose I was just emotionally drained already. But why haven't you asked yourself yet? Or have you already? My eye looked over to his deacon as he grinned at me earnestly. If the rot claimed them, stunned them, deprived their lungs of breath and their skin of warmth, why didn't it do the same to you? He patted me on the back before shoving me into the wagon once more. The rot lingers here. It will not destroy anything now without exposure, as it has long since started to dissipate. But I must make haste nonetheless. He slammed the wagon door closed behind me, but I heard something when the latch clicked. I don't know the proper terms to describe the noise exactly, but I recognized it as a sound I'd heard before. It was the sound of a loose latch. It was a sound of possible freedom. I waited for a while, trying to set out if there'd be a proper time to act. I'd decided that I was wrong about earlier. I would even have used these bound hands to drag myself to freedom regardless of the difficulty. Wherever this man was taking me was a place I did not want to go. I didn't want to solve the mysteries of the metal or the maidens or the daughter of bones. I didn't honestly care about those in this moment. I'd watched an entire town collapse due to something. I saw my friends and everybody I'd come to know as corpses. I accepted entirely that this was due to something supernatural, and I absolutely refused to find out what waited at the end of this wagon ride. I already knew where I was going. I knew what this man was. He was a zealot of the cult of metal. I felt the wagon come to an incline, and I let my body roll back against the gate. I hadn't thought that I was actually going to roll through it just from that, and I was correct. I was just mass with no leverage, but hitting the gate like that probably did me some favors in terms of my next move. The wagon didn't even seem to slow. He didn't care if I thudded around, but he'd probably hear the sound of an open gate swinging fairly quickly. I couldn't see well for the wood, but there were tiny cracks that I pressed my eye against. There were sounds outside. I was trying to place myself in the world. Dawn was coming soon. Escaping in the daylight would be considerably harder. So I listened. There'd be no point in giving up my advantage just yet, but when the wagon's wheels left the road and I heard bushes up against the wood sides, I acted. I wriggled my way towards the gate, and with all the weakness my knees could muster, I kicked at it. The latch came almost entirely free, hanging enough that I wasn't able to yet escape, but that I could see outside. I didn't recognize where we were, but that didn't matter. I'd leaned myself against the side of the gate to try to discern where I could go, when a massive bump knocked the gate entirely free. I fell out of the wagon, surprised but silent as I thudded onto the ground. The wagon continued into the distance as I crawled my way into the brush. I heard wheels come to a halt, and footsteps for a moment before his deacon fell to riotous laughter. I crawled quietly through the bushes as he heckled me from some distance away, stopping whenever I thought he might hear me. Stopping so that I might hear him in relation to where I was hiding. I knew what direction I was headed. I needed to reach the road. I needed to wriggle my way beyond the National Guard's blockade. I needed to find somebody who could help me get out of my bonds and get the fuck out of here. Do you think you can outrun the Lord? No matter where you run, you are but a prodigal child. Whether by my hand or by the metal, you will return to us. You can run into the forest, run to shelter, run to others. But no matter where you run, it will never be to safety, boy. The truth has you by the throat. It just hasn't started to compress yet, but it will. Believe me when I say it will. You're not the first carrier that we've captured. You won't be the last. I lay there still as clay. The fact that this man found the room to my house that I slept in not far at all from my mind. Hopefully this would be more difficult, though. Hopefully by laying still here, by holding my breath and being as still as possible, he'd leave. And he did leave. I'll find you one day, boy. Don't you fret a bit. The metal will have you. He paused for a moment, perhaps sniffing the air. Perhaps he was thinking. I know you can hear me. I'm certain that you can. So let me tell you something, boy. You're not considering what your survival here means, so I'll spell it out to you. It wasn't random that your home fell to pieces around you. It'll happen again no matter who you know or wherever you go. You will be a harbinger of ruin. You will bring his glory to whatever space you inhabit, and we will follow you there, led by the smell of copper in the air. You're not his prophet, but you may yet be a convert. So go, carry your gospel. Let what befell your town be inflicted on others. If you won't come with us, then to ruin you will bring those beside you. You carry the glorious rot in the depths of your soul. We have the answers. We will never spare you the details. We came too, so now I'll show you the greatest display of faith I can. I'll let you free here. I will not search for you any longer. But I know you will search for us, prodigal son of metal. And soon. I got away. You let me get away. All that effort to capture me. You let me go so easily. Why? Well, I know. And that brings me to why this story even exists. It's an explanation to those around me about where I've been and where I've gone. It wasn't curiosity that drove me to find them. It wasn't a need for answers that I frankly don't care about. Another town felt a glorious ruin around me, and then another, and I suppose that I began to feel that I truly had nowhere else to turn. The scars I had from my encounter with his deacon have started to harden. My eye socket, with my previously ruptured eye having been removed after it was discovered to have gotten tetanus, was no longer vacant. A new eye had grown in a single night, only this one glowed dimly in the darkness. When my nose was broken before, I had lost my sense of smell. Now I can smell the metal rot. I started to have dreams of something beyond the curtain of stars that we can see when we look to the night sky. Something that sat amongst throngs of corpses on a world that burned beside its sun. Something that had a precious thing hidden away on our world, disturbed by petulant little humans. It took back its cherished ward and left a wound in the mountains. Now our world festers with the rot gifted to us by our metal lord. If you're listening to this, the reason will be that I am a convert. And this is the gospel I've left behind. So I say to you, if you start to smell the scent of copper, we will find you. After all, it means that you're due for your first sermon. And as long as you can smell it, I can smell you. As his missionary, I have to be sure that you get a good sermon. Wow, what the hell was going on there? Well, every so often a story comes along and you think, what on earth is that all about? And that is definitely one of those, don't you think? Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Weird, wonderful, and, well, totally bizarre. Really good way to start the year. Well, I have had enough for one evening, but I'll be back again very, very soon, aiming to get a lot of good stuff out. A lot of longer stories as well. So, back again very soon, as I say. But for now, that's enough. Don't you think? Please say yes. The voice is going. Oh, my dear friends, till the next time, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.